Peter. Each one of you has received a special grace. So like good stewards responsible for all these different graces of God, put yourselves at the service of others. If you're a speaker, speak in words which seem to come from God. If you're a helper, help as though every action was done at God's orders, so that in everything God may receive the glory through Jesus Christ, since to him alone belong all glory and power forever and ever. Amen. Let us pray. Father God, these men and women come together as the town council to serve the people of Blackpool. We ask that you give them all the graces, abilities and talents that they need to serve usefully and effectively. May they work together altruistically for the common good and strive to bring unity and peace to those whom they govern. Through Christ our Lord. Amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. And may the blessing of Almighty God rest upon your counsels. Amen.
Thank you, Father. Good evening to everyone, councillors, officers, and anyone viewing this meeting online. Can I remind councillors, please be seated in the seats allocated to you for voting purposes. Can I also take the opportunity to remind councillors to turn their microphones on while speaking and to turn them off again once finished. Otherwise, you will not be heard on the broadcast. I don't believe we have any official apologies for absence. No, right. Declarations of interest. Now, councillors need to declare their interest in items on the agenda. Can I remind councillors that you should declare the type of interest that you have, the agenda item and reference in question, and the reason why you have an interest. There are likely to be a large number of interests declared at this meeting, being a budget meeting, so I'm going to suggest that we do this initially by agenda item. Could I ask for any declarations of interest regarding item 3, which is the rent review? Councillor Brooks.
Yeah, personal interest on item 3, proposed rent review. I'm a non-executive director of Blackpool Coastal Housing.
Thank you.
Councillor
Hobson,
yes.
Yes.
Personal interest for the same reasons Councillor Brooks.
Right. Yes, Councillor Mitchell. If I could just say to everyone, Councillor Mitchell has been given permission again to remain seated whilst addressing the council.
Thank you, Mayor. Personal interest, agenda item 3 for the same reasons, non-executive director of housing. Thank you.
Item for a member of the CFA.
Item 4B, non-executive director of Blackpool Transport.
Item 4, personal interest as a non-executive director on Blackpool Transport.
Item 4B, non-executive director of Blackpool Transport.
record. Is that proposed? Seconded? Yes. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. They are agreed. Right, that brings us to item 3, which is the proposed rent review, which can be found on pages 19 to 34. I believe it is Councillor Smith to move this item. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's a pleasure to introduce item 3 of the agenda, proposed rent review for 25 and 26. The proposal is to increase the housing rent for the social housing by 2.7% as recommended by the central government, or CPI 1.7 plus 1%. As you can see, this is lower than the previous year, which was 7.7%. The average weekly rent in Blackpool for 24-25 was £84.34 for social housing and affordable for £113.12. With comparison to the private rented sector in that, considering the rent increase would put a 3-bedroom house in the council would be £446 per calendar month. Currently, the cheapest house as I checked today, on a website called Rightmove, showing the two properties being £695 per calendar month. That is £20 up on last year when I was at the meeting when I said this report. So that's an increase of, compared to last year in the private sector lowest property, of 2.9%. More than as I quit last year. The average for, I looked at the average over the lowest housing on available rent for the lowest 10 properties, works out at £795 per calendar month. This makes a 3-bedroom house, such as 44% cheaper than any other property in the private rented sector. With the demand of residents wanting to rent a house from the council, knowing that the quality of homes provided and the council being the landlord of choice, you know, because we give lots of support to our residents outside just the home itself. Currently, 7% of tenants are in receipt of benefits that's such as direct support for the housing. Even the increase would be below the housing allowance. Housing has some of the lowest social rents, Blackpool has the lowest rents in the country, being the 9th lowest in the country for 24-25, and would be in the 22% below the national average across the UK. Looking forward to the year ahead, we're looking for development of Whitegate Manor, which will be started later this month, which will increase our 25 1-bedroom, fully accessible sheltered accommodation. So that'll be starting at the end of March, as I said, you know. So I think in the increase of 2.7% on the house rent, I think is fair and reasonable to put on the rents compared to the other private rent sector out there. So I put the proposal forward. I look forward to your comments.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Williams to second.
Just happy to second, Mayor. Thank you. I reserve the right to speak.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Last year, almost the very day, this was actually quite an informative discussion that we had, and I'd like to thank Councillor Brooks, who educated the Chamber as to why the HRA was important and what it did. So Councillor Brooks, as I recall, Mr Mayor, told us that it would allow us to invest in new housing stock. It would allow us to invest in carbon neutrality and so on, and that's why this mattered. And I did some research and thought that's a fair point. What I then also wanted to look at, though, is, okay, what other ways have we got of funding this? Because a pattern does emerge that whilst it is 2.7% of this increase, the previous 2 increases take that as a collective, Mr Mayor, 15.4%. And those are always the maximum increases that we could give some of our most vulnerable residents. And then I hear the call, Mr Mayor, oh, but most of the residents affected will have that increase paid for by other means, other support. But there is another trend in this data that I thought was interesting, Mr Mayor, that the numbers last year who were receiving that support was 17%. This year it's 30%. So a greater number of people, the people who have to pay this themselves has increased to 30%. What's also different, Mr Mayor, is that the Household Support Fund that is there to help families across the town who may be struggling with financial means to pay things like their rent and their bills ends in March. Now, what I've noticed other authorities, what they've done, Mr Mayor, is that they have put together support for residents who don't get the support through benefits to pay the increases in order to support the HRA. So my concern, and it's our group's concern, is we don't think enough is being done in terms of arrears, supplier costs, back office costs, and the faster turnaround of empty properties in this town with our properties, all of which would actually generate just as much money, if not more, than the 300, 400,000 that you're aiming to raise by this increase. And whilst it may only be £3.50 for some of the poorest tenants in that 30%, £3.50 when you don't have much money is a huge amount of money to pay. So we will be voting against it. But what I would like to see, it's certainly in these reports, Mr Mayor, is more evidence around really to support Councillor Brooks's point about what else are we doing to capitalise the HRA other than just making our tenants pay it to populate it. So work around arrears, work around supplier costs, work around those back office costs, and crucially faster turnaround on empty properties should get you better figures without making the poor pay.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Brooks.
It's almost like I've been invited by Councillor Galley to have another history lesson. I'm glad that I made such an impression last year, because I think it's beholden on me to remind people that we've got a responsibility to maintain a healthy housing revenue account over a 30-year period. That's a given. And I'll also remind you, a bit of history again, Councillor Galley, that in 2011, it was the Conservative Party that decided on this cunning plan for a CPI plus 1% rent increase annually to cap rent so that poor people and people in social housing weren't punished unnecessarily. In 2017, by the way, they undermined that policy because they then came up with a political gimmick. They said, I'll tell you what, we'll have 3 years of a 1% cut in social rents every year. So they did it for 3 years, and then at the end of that, they decided, hang on a minute, we've made a mess here, because even Tory authorities are struggling. Even Tory authorities' housing revenue accounts are going belly up because we're not putting enough into them and they can't balance over the 30 years. So here we are again, same arguments. All we're saying is we should be CPI plus 1. Actually, it makes me a bit guilty, really, because it's actually a former Tory party policy. But I won't hold that against myself because I think it's quite reasonable given the ambition we've got. And it's not about showboating and cheap politics, really, saying, well, we'll look after the poor people and we'll look after the weakest in our society. Because the HRA with a CPI plus 1, I'll just tell you what it's going to do in Blackpool. It'll allow us to continue investing in our ageing council housing stock. And you're right to point out voids, which we're looking at, to turn around properties quicker. What you don't say is what's in the report, that we're actually benchmarked against peer organisations and our back office costs are some of the lowest in the peer group and in the North West. We'll continue to address damp and mould costs as quickly as possible and complete all repairs promptly. We'll ensure that bathrooms, kitchens, rewiring, etc. continue to be reinvested and replaced to improve and to ensure decent accommodation for generations to come. All this comes out of the HRA and needs to be factored in. We'll continue in our ambition to increase the percentage of secure social housing for people in Blackpool to the national average of 17%. To sum up, it's time to end this scandal of one of the most deprived areas in the country with some of the lowest wages in the country having some of the least numbers of social housing for rent. At the last count, we had 12,000 households on the waiting list for social housing. We've got 110 households in temporary accommodation, 50 of which are in B&B. That's why it's essential that we maintain our HRA properly and that we can grow the numbers of properties across our portfolio which are available for social and affordable rent in future to help our families properly. So we're not showboating and playing playground politics. We're actually getting on with the business and letting our record on housing speak for itself, as it will later on.
Just in the nick of time, Councillor, I was just going to call you out because you were on a red light. Thank you. Have we any further speakers on this? No. Councillor Smith, you're right to reply. Have to be a bit quicker than that, Councillor, in future. Councillor O'Neill.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Sorry about that. I will improve. Just a quick question for Councillor Smith. So we see the selective licensing coming in. I noticed you did a comparison to the private rates for housing. We are going to see that increase. I spoke to a number of landlords who manage a number of properties, and they are going to have to put this increase onto the rents. So just a question for you, just for in future. I hope we're not looking at that gap between the two and judging that on its merits, because they are going to be artificially higher as a consequence of the selective licensing.
Councillor Burdett.
Sorry, just briefly to come back on that. I don't see, with the selective licensing, I don't see that the increase that it would of the license, I don't see that passing on the increase of the registration to the selective licensing system would make that much of a difference. It's only £1 per week. It is £1 per week. So I think you're making rather too much of the increase. It shouldn't negatively affect tenants. And if it does, that's about the landlord and not about the scheme. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Do you wish to exercise your right, leader, at this stage?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, it was just another point on the around the selective licensing. Is we need to do this. The quality of accommodation means that we have to get on with this, because some of the accommodation in Blackpool is appalling. We have lots of good landlords, but we also equally have some very poor ones, and selective licensing across the town is absolutely vital to those families, people and children that are living in substandard accommodation. And as Councillor Burdett has said, if the landlord is doing all that they should, if they are complying with, then it absolutely reduces those charges. So if they get on board and enact those requirements, enact those improvements to the property, then it will actually substantially reduce to, as Councillor Burdett says, very little. Thank you.
Councillor Smith, you're right to reply.
Mr Mayor, thank you, Councillor Galley. I made the assumption your party on the other side would sort of say no to this, as they do to anything we propose in the council, you know. So, I mean, as I said in my opening remarks, that we are one of the lowest in the country, and we are lowest, lower than, as you said, the private rental sector, for good quality homes that we invest in for our tenants. So we need to protect the tenants and the future of the properties, as Councillor Brooks said, for the next 30 years as a programme for the housing revenue account. So it's in line with inflation, it's in line with everything else. So if we're not doing it, we're putting pressure on everything else. If we don't increase the rent, we put pressure on services that deliver the services, not just the housing, but it's all the sort of wraparound service that we provide as just for social housing in Blackpool. So on that grounds, I would say we sort of would disagree with your comments there. Thank you, Councillor Brooks, for additional history lesson today on the housing revenue account. Councillor O'Neill, yes, selective licence. Yeah, we are looking to do that within the inner wards, and I've done the maths around that. It works out around about probably I think it's £1 or just less than £1 per week increase would be if the landlord had decided to increase the cost, put on the cost, considering taxation and everything else, it'd probably be less than £1 a week. So. And that works out at £52 a year. I don't think that's going to make a bigger difference than the gap between what we're giving as an affordable social house compared to what's in the private sector market. But thank you for your comments. Thank you, Councillor Burgess, for your comments there, and also thank you, Leader. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Well, that brings us to that we have a recorded vote.
recorded vote on the motion in the name of Councillor Smith. Please could members indicate their answer with yes, no or abstain. Councillor Bamborough? Yes. Councillor Benson? Yes. Councillor Boughton? Yes. Councillor Neil Brooks?
Yes.
Councillor Pam Brooks? Yes. Councillor Sean Brooks?
Yes.
Councillor Badess?
Yes.
Councillor Campbell?
Yes.
Councillor Cartmel?
Yes.
Councillor Ellison? No. Councillor Farrell? Yes. Councillor Fenlon? Yes. Councillor Flanagan? Yes. Councillor Galley? No. Councillor Hobson?
Yes.
Councillor Hoyle?
Yes.
Councillor Hugo? Yes. Councillor Jackson?
Yes.
Councillor Jones? Yes. Councillor Marshall? Yes. Councillor McKevitt? Yes. Councillor Bradley Mitchell? No. Councillor Carl Mitchell? No. Councillor Diane Mitchell? No. Councillor O'Neill?
Yes.
Councillor Roberts?
No.
Councillor Danny Scott?
No.
Councillor Michelle Scott? No. Councillor Sloman?
No.
Councillor Smith?
Yes.
Councillor Taylor?
Yeah.
Councillor Thomas?
Yes.
Councillor Williams?
Yes.
Councillor Wilshaw?
No.
Mr Mayor?
Abstain.
Mr Mayor, members have voted as follows: 24 for, 10 against, 1 abstention.
The motion is therefore carried. That brings us to item 4, which is the General Fund Revenue Budget Council Tax and Dedicated School Grant for 2025-2026. To be moved by the Leader of the Council, and there is no time limit on this speech. So over to the Leader.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm to move the Council to agree the proposed recommendations numbered 2.1 to 2.14 as outlined in Agenda Item 4 and updated in this order of proceedings to reflect the Police and Crime Commission for Lancashire Precept and the Lancashire Combined Fire Authority Precept for the financial year 2025-2026. Mayor, it's my privilege to introduce the 25-26 budget to Council this evening. I can't quite believe that this is my 5th budget speech to Council. I'd like to say time flies when you're having fun, but the truth is that the real business of government, be that local or national, is difficult, involving tough choices, balancing the needs of the now with a clear focus on the long term. And this is what Labour continues to do locally as we deliver a better Blackpool for our residents, businesses and visitors. Our determination to deliver a better Blackpool is a central theme of my speech today. I will begin by giving some perspectives on the national backdrop to this year's budget. I will then take members through the essential detail of the budget, as well as taking some time to outline our consistent approach to sound financial management. I will then talk about some of the successes of the last 12 months before focusing on the year ahead. It is clear that 2025 will be another year of progress in creating the better Blackpool that we all want to be a part of. I will begin, Mayor, with some reflections on the national context surrounding this budget. This time last year, we were witnessing the death throes of 14 years of Conservative failure. We are all familiar with the specifics. Chaos at the top and a sorry catalogue of failures resulting in the worst inheritance for any new government in living memory. Public services and public finances on their knees, a broken NHS, an economy without growth, and living standards worse than when the Conservatives came to power in 2011. A truly shocking position. And last summer, the electorate gave the Conservatives the hammering they deserved. The incumbent Labour government has begun the difficult task of reversing this position. As we know locally, positive time takes change, years, not days, and it involves tough choices. However, we can see a government that is determined to stabilise public finances and making progress on important things like waiting times and appointments in the NHS, as well as key areas such as housing standards and the delivery of new social and affordable housing. I recognise that there are many mountains to climb if Labour is to recover the damage of the last 14 years, and that no government gets everything right. However, it is clear that we now have a government acting in the national interest and in the interest of the majority and not a privileged few. This changed national context matters for local government. Labour understands the importance of local public services. We've witnessed this already. The government immediately returned the oversight of local government to a full Ministry of State topped by the Deputy Prime Minister. I'm pleased that we are now working with the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, headed by Angela Rayner, with a cross-Whitehall brief. This ministry also includes Minister of State Jim McMahon, who I've met on several occasions in recent months in terms of devolution. Both Jim and Angela know local government inside out. They've worked in it, they care deeply about it, and they have a clear vision for a more positive future in which local government and local public services can be rebuilt and renewed so that they can again deliver what our residents and businesses need. Although we've had a positive change at national level, times remain very difficult for local government. There's no denying this. We are simply not funded to deliver the services we need to, but green shoots of change are now emerging. It is clear that we now have a government that understands the position of local government with the determination to reform its financing, and the government has made some positive first moves in the settlement for local government this year. So merit it is to this settlement and our budget that I now turn. For the first time in over a decade, the government's local government finance settlement has started to reflect the genuine needs, demands, demographies and deprivations of individual local authorities. Whilst only a one-year settlement, having only been in office half a year to be able to assess the financial damage of the previous 14 years, it does bode well for a promised multi-year settlement from 26-27. The Council's core spending power, which contains the bulk of the Council's funding for council tax, business rates, revenue support grants and social care grants, increased year on year in the final settlement by 9.95%, and that does not include other grants such as public health, the new extended producer responsibility or the dedicated schools grant. But before we get too excited and look to invest further, we must appreciate that this is merely the beginning of payback towards the service investment that this administration has already been making in recent years to frontline services and been criticised for overspending and drawing on reserves and balances in doing so. This funding also has to cover the increased costs of national insurance. This revenue budget contains growth of over 29 million, besides additional planned capital investment of 33 million. Our continuing policy of paying at least the real living wage, not just to our directly employed staff, but to commissioned staff in our care services, is paying dividends. Within the Council, we are seeing the lowest spending agency staff across the whole North West region, recognising the attractiveness of Blackpool Council as a good employer and manifesting in a loyal and low turnover workforce. Lower costs here are a positive consequence of us doing the right thing. Prior to the settlement, we were anticipating a budget gap of between 15 to 20 million. As I've explained, the government made positive moves in the settlement, and the actual position means that the gap is now 8.6 million. After 14 consecutive and fatiguing years of budget cuts, this is a big ask, but we have never dodged this responsibility and have always sought the solutions necessary to deliver a balanced budget. I never failed to be surprised at the innovation, commitment and creativity of my Cabinet colleagues and Council officers, and it is this approach that has steered us to where we are now. We have always been clear that we will do everything we can to protect services for our residents. It is for this reason that as part of this settlement, we will, like the vast majority of councils nationwide, be increasing council tax by 4.99%, which includes a 2% adult social care precept. We do not do this lightly. I understand the ongoing pressures on household finances, but I will not take decisions that erode the services upon which our residents depend. As I said before, council tax is a highly regressive form of taxation in need of wholesale reform. The new government understand this and have committed to bringing forward proposals for change that deliver greater fairness in this system. At this point, it would be remiss of me not to bring up the issue of council debt before the opposition surely does later. It is undeniable that Blackpool is undergoing an unprecedented programme of regeneration. In the last financial year, the Council's capital investment reached a staggering 143 million, primarily as a result of the DWP offices at Talbot Gateway and the town and skyline now has a very different feel to it than 15 years ago. But such transformational investment requires calculated risk and an appetite to borrow to invest that the private sector would never muster in the early stages of such a master plan. It is true that we now have accumulated debt of approximately 570 million, but we have plenty to show for it. Our long-term assets are valued at over 1.1 billion. That's a loan-to-value ratio of 50%. Our plant, property and equipment is valued at over 600 million. Our infrastructure assets of highway, sea defences and tramway are valued at nearly 300 million. But their purpose is not to add value to the council's balance sheet, but to add value to the town. Yes, we could sell properties to reduce debt, but much of the council's property is revenue generating that supports the revenue budget. Arguably, we could consider selling our infrastructure assets. A previous and infamous Conservative governments once sold the country's water infrastructure, and look where that got us. Residents are seeing water bill increases in 25, 26 of an unbelievable 30%. Accountants are often quoted as knowing the cost of everything and the value of nothing. The council's investment in its infrastructure is not undertaken to add value to its balance sheet, but to create value in the town and for its residents. For example, the new 16 million highway at the enterprise zone will release land that will bring 10 new businesses and 600 new jobs in the growth sectors of the economy, along with new business rates. The opposition will make spurious and unfounded statements about financial mismanagement, and I will say this. In 2024-25, the government supported 19 local authorities in England with exceptional financial support. In 2025-26, a further 14 are quoted in the media as requiring it, with a further 32 at risk. That is 65 local authorities in total out of 317, or 20%, 1 in 5. Furthermore, 6 local authorities have been granted permission to increase their council tax above the referendum limit of 5%. Blackpool, the most deprived local authority in England with some of the highest funding cuts per head of population during the austerity years, is not on any of these lists. So how is that, Mayor? It's because this Labour Council, year after year after year, has delivered sound financial management while making sensible investments in the town's future. Mayor, I'm proud of what this Labour Council is doing to deliver a better Blackpool. So much hard work is now bearing fruit. I want to spend the remainder of my speech upon this, and I'd like to pay particular attention to some recent successes and the year ahead. As members will be aware, late last year I brought a refreshed council plan to this chamber for approval. That plan continued to express our agenda in terms of 2 headline priorities: our communities and our economy. I will therefore structure most of my comments around these 2 themes. However, before I do this, I want to talk about our extraordinary progress on one crucial issue that straddles both these themes, and that is housing. Our revised council plan gave special attention to housing. It is an issue that underscores everything. Anyone who understands Blackpool will recognise this. Very poor quality housing, especially in Blackpool's inner areas, lies at the heart of so many of our challenges. Poor quality private rented housing devastates lives and repeatedly destroys life chances of our residents. That situation is totally unacceptable. This is why this Labour administration has invested so much time and energy in recent years in doing everything we can to do something about it. This Labour Council established a unique, wholly owned housing company to get hold of poor quality property and convert into affordable, warm, secure homes for local residents. Back in 2016, we weren't absolutely sure how well the model will work, but it has delivered, spectacularly so. We've invested for the long term and to date have created over 750 fantastic homes for local people in our inner areas. Not only is the social dividend of this investment enormous, the value of the property we have created significantly exceeds the value of the borrowing to deliver it. I can't think of a better example of us borrowing to invest in the right way and in the future of this town. However, we knew we had to go much further than this to begin to deliver changes at scale in our inner areas. This is why we grabbed the opportunity in 2022 to pilot work with National Government and Homes England on our housing challenges. At my last budget speech, I reported that I was hopeful that this work would result in a first investment by Homes England into our failing inner area housing market. Shortly after last year's Budget Council, we were allocated 90 million of Homes England funding to begin a first phase of housing regeneration in inner Blackpool. No other area of the country has received this level of funding, and we fought tooth and nail for it. The truth which we acknowledge is that it will take decades to regenerate the whole of inner Blackpool, but we will do it, and we now have a chance to make a start. We've already begun the process of identifying the first area to benefit from housing regeneration, and the process of property and land acquisition will begin later this year. In time, we will deliver fantastic new homes and neighbourhoods for local residents to include a significant increase in quality social and affordable housing. We fought so hard for this chance, and I am determined that we will deliver. At the same time, in 2025, we will complete master planning exercises in areas of South Shore and Claremont, so that we can have more neighbourhoods ready for capital investment into housing regeneration. The government has indicated that it intends to revise Treasury funding metrics so that it better suits making investments into areas in need of regeneration. We hope to benefit from this approach in terms of future funding, and these master planning exercises will mean that we are again on the front foot. Another key strand of our housing agenda concerns standards, in particular raising minimum legal standards in the private rented sector. Far too much property in inner Blackpool trades at the bottom of a very poor quality private rented market, with many homes legally compliant but still awful. We have lobbied relentlessly for change to national regulations, and the government has listened. To be fair, work on this with Blackpool was started by the previous government, but it has been given fresh priority and energy by the new Deputy Prime Minister. The government has now carried through the legislation that will end no-fault evictions and crucially establish a decent home standards for the private rented sector. At the same time, over the last year, Blackpool has used this moment in the spotlight to gain Secretary of State approval for blanket selective licensing for private rented housing in inner Blackpool. We will start to deliver the scheme and enforce as necessary in the year ahead. It is my ambition that Blackpool will pilot the application and enforcement of the new higher standards for the private rented sector in due course. We are also a proud council house owning authority. New council housing has a key role to play in our regeneration plans. In the last year, we have completed our fantastic new scheme at Grange Park, giving 133 individuals and families the chance of a top quality affordable home. And the year ahead, we will deliver new sheltered housing at Whitegate Manor and commence the design of the first new council housing schemes for inner Blackpool as part of our housing regeneration programme. Like Grange Park, our new council homes at Whitegate Manor will be delivered by local contractor Tyson's, employing local people and local apprentices. Alongside all this, we are delivering a new strategy to ensure that empty homes are brought back into use as soon as possible, not only providing much needed housing stock for our communities, but reducing the blight we can sadly see them become on our local communities, reducing safety concerns and antisocial behaviour. Better housing is indeed at the heart of delivering a better Blackpool. Everyone in this town deserves access to an affordable, warm, secure home, and we're going to continue to go so much further than other local authorities to increase the supply of it. Nowhere else is delivering a housing agenda as comprehensive as this, and who has sustained the confidence of both Conservative and Labour governments to deliver such ambitious change. And we're doing all of this not because it's easy, which it isn't, but because it's what our residents need now and into the future. Nothing matters more than our residents and communities. We have and will continue to invest significantly in key services for them. Whilst the party opposite can only see pound signs when we speak about adult and children's social care, we see people and communities that need help and support. We are investing in family safeguarding, multidisciplinary services to help keep families together safely. We are invested in the Mockingbird project to support our foster carers to look after children with more complex needs. We are investing in increasing the number of foster carers to make sure we can provide looked after children with the most supportive environment possible if they cannot be with their own families. We will continue to invest in children's services and in innovative approaches that keep families together safely. Our looked after children's number is currently 533 compared to 616 in June 2022. Agency staff in children's services are less than 8%, one of the very lowest in our region, reflecting the confidence that staff in our approach. Our latest Ofsted Joint Target Area Inspection report speaks highly of our services and our partnerships. I am proud that we have invested £4 million in provider fees so that the real living wage can continue to be paid to our Commission adult social care staff. These are some of the lowest paid people in the town doing some of the most difficult, critical jobs looking after our most vulnerable. We are so proud of recognising their contribution through the real living wage, a Labour investment for all the right reasons enacted in the teeth of Tory austerity, and we're absolutely going to continue with it. We will continue to invest in services that help keep people out of hospital, relieving pressure on the NHS at this difficult time. Many of our vulnerable residents do not have anyone to turn to at times of crisis. We on this side of the chamber will always be here for them, while those opposite would just say there's no more room at the inn. November 24 marked Blackpool's first anniversary of becoming a fast-track city, which is a global partnership between cities and towns around the world with a core aim of supporting cities and municipalities to eliminate HIV-related stigma and to achieve the UNAIDS targets. Over the first year, we've worked hard to increase testing, increase access to prevention, including PrEP, and getting those diagnosed treated as soon as possible. In the summer of 2025, Blackpool aims to become one of the first councils to become a HIV-confident council to help us reduce HIV-related stigma and promote inclusivity within our community by ensuring inclusive services, staff education and other initiatives. We will continue to invest in our early parenting service. We are proud that 130 children in Blackpool are supported through the early parenting service, which support parents to be the best they can be by providing consistent and intensive support, utilising a toolkit of evidence-based interventions throughout the antenatal period until the baby is up to 3 months old. This service recently won the Nursing Times Nursing in a Community Award and the Health Service Journal Primary and Community Care Innovation of the Year Award, two extremely prestigious awards for service working with some of our most vulnerable residents. We will continue to invest in services that serve to prevent serious disease. Last year, the national measles outbreak led to public health working in close partnership with GP practices, NHS England and Far Coast Medical Services to provide Blackpool residents with additional clinics, call and recall through Blackpool GP practices and through a door-knocking vaccination service within people's homes, which has vaccinated 229 Blackpool residents. I'm pleased to say that during the recent outbreaks of measles in other parts of the country, we have not had a single case of measles despite the large number of people coming into the town. We have invested in our diverse and varied holiday activities and food programme, with an average of 1,150 places available per day across 9 providers at 36 clubs in 28 locations, spanning the length and breadth of the town. Providers have been able to deliver for 9 weeks of the holidays. We have engaged both new and existing participants, supporting approximately 2,000 unique eligible children. Of these unique participants, 84% are children eligible for 3 school meals and 16% being targeted through other vulnerabilities. On the theme of provision for our young people, last year witnessed the success of a bid by the council submitted with the Boys and Girls Club to the Youth Investment Fund, the redevelopment and expansion of the Talbot and Brunswick Youth Centre on Gorton Street. With the 1.7 million that we were successful with, we are doubling the size of the original youth club and providing youth work opportunities across the week. We have continued to invest in making Blackpool safe and welcoming for residents and visitors alike, with growth in the provision of CCTV across the town, coupled with work with businesses, schools and colleges across the town to strengthen our It Stops Here on harassment with the Green Drop programme training. A new local partnership focus on safety, particularly the safety of women and girls, is evolving alongside our strengthened community safety, domestic abuse and safeguarding commitments to vulnerable children and adults. Making victims of abuse safer in their own home and ensuring that domestic abuse is never tolerated will always be a key priority. Our investment in simple solutions, including video doorbells, has both improved the safety of victims and the ability of the police to progress prosecutions when bail conditions are breached. In 2025, we will go further in terms of our Changing Futures programme. As members may recall, Lancashire was previously awarded pilot funding for the development of new approaches to support people facing multiple disadvantage, those with mental health needs, substance misuse, homelessness, offending behaviour and experience of domestic abuse. The pilot funding was to harness the ability and empathy of people who had already faced and overcome a life of multiple disadvantage, making best use of their lived experience to connect people into the services they need, and also to redesign those services to make them more trauma responsive. The evaluation of the pilot programme was successful, and therefore a 12-month extension of funding has been made available, with results informing the government spending review. Dr. Arif Rajpura, our Director of Public Health, is committed to making a difference to people facing multiple disadvantage, and therefore will be taking direct control of the Lancashire programme, with overall responsibility for the programme and its outcomes moving from Blackburn to Blackpool Council. Economic growth and regeneration are crucial to delivering a better Blackpool. We want our residents to have access to good jobs and for our young people to think they can have a positive future here. If you look around, you can see the progress we are making. From our town centre all the way to the enterprise zone, you can see delivery of our £2 billion growth and prosperity programme, with its three strategic objectives of town centre regeneration, establishing a year-round tourism economy and creating jobs in the growth sectors of the economy. Alongside 90 million of money for housing since 2022, we have secured some 180 million of government funding to deliver a better economy. These are extraordinary numbers and testament to the quality of our plans, our partnerships and our staff and members who lead the fight for investment for Blackpool day and night. Blackpool's economic heartbeat is our visitor economy. As members are aware, we now top 20 million visits a year. That said, it is fair that 2024 was a challenging year for tourism, with the cost of living crisis and general climate of uncertainty caused by global events. Despite this, during our key summer months of July and August, footfall on the promenade was significantly ahead of 2023. Once again, we saw that the events programme being key to this. For example, over 400,000 watching the air show weekend in August, meaning that it is now the biggest in the country. Illumination switched on by Mel B was seen by over 60,000 people, and over 300,000 people attended a fireworks event. Christmas by the Sea brings in 20% more people to the Christmas period than the years without the event. This increase in our popularity also spreads to other areas. Britain's Got Talent used Blackpool for all of the heats of this year's competition, shining a spotlight on the town and bringing tens of thousands of people to watch the shows. Independent evidence by the think tank Centre for Cities shows Blackpool draws in the highest overnight visitor spending in terms of its size, beating places like Glasgow and Edinburgh. This success is happening in very tough times because of the investment that this administration has made in the tourism infrastructure of the town, and by creating the reasons to visit through events and new attractions, we will continue to see growth. Events are only one part of our strategy. The 4-star Holiday Inn opened in May, and occupancy and room rates have delivered fully against the targets, and the hotel ranks highest in customer feedback for Holiday Inns in the UK. The Backlot Cinema and Diner, with its IMAX screen, one of the largest in the country, and multiple screens, have created a top-class attraction in the town centre, bringing new benefits to residents and visitors alike. We've all seen the success of the new market, the illuminations improvement, and in the year ahead we will make further progress with additional projects such as the conversion and redevelopment of the post office. We continue to support local people to acquire skills, jobs and start businesses. Over the past 2 years, our Growth Business Academy has supported 220 new business startups and helped 130 local businesses deliver their growth plans. We have also helped 100 businesses to develop decarbonisation plans to help reduce costs and emissions. I'm particularly excited about the development of the Robinson, our refurbished Stanley buildings. This is scheduled to open in May after a 7.9 investment as part of our Town Deal programme. The Robinson will provide 44 new offices for new and growing businesses, as well as state-of-the-art ground meeting rooms and co-working spaces. The project is being delivered by local contractor Parkinson and designed by local architects Cassidy and Ashton. We know we have an undersupply of good quality small business accommodation in Blackpool, so this is a fantastic addition to our offer. As members know, the future of our young people matters a great deal to me. It's why I became an elected member in the first place. I'm proud that the Platform Employment and Skills Service for Young People has now engaged and helped over 1,500 young people, with over 500 getting a job and a further almost 400 young people entering into further education or training. There is still so much to do in terms of supporting young people. This is why I'm pleased that Blackpool has been awarded the 2.3 million by the Youth Futures Foundation to address youth unemployment. We will work through the Blackpool Connected Futures Partnership to better understand how we can support young people through the likes of new employment-focused connected curriculum for secondary pupils. I'm pleased that our young leaders are actively shaping all this by co-creating a youth leadership blueprint, co-chairing our Skills and Employment Board, and co-designing the programme's work streams. This is a good opportunity also to update members on Project Search. Our Project Search helps young people with learning disabilities and or autism into placements across a year-long programme with the ultimate aim of paid employment. I'm so pleased to say that in the last year we've been helping 20 young people, an increase from previous years, into employment through this programme. We should all be proud of this. It's simply one of the best things that we do and underscores our desire to help all of our young people to get on. We want Blackpool children to know that higher skills can be for them. So we're bringing aspiration and the opportunity of higher skills into the very centre of town in the form of the Multiversity in partnership with our local college. Later this year, we will see a start on the construction of the 56 million new Multiversity building. This will bring a higher education campus along with 3,500 students into the heart of our town centre. This facility will provide vocational, higher level degree and other qualifications that are specifically targeted on careers and jobs that will get local young people into employment and help others to move on in their careers. Developments like this will continue to change the face of Blackpool for the better and bring further footfall to the town centre. 2025 will also see important progress at Blackpool Airport Enterprise Zone. Work on the major highway to open up 10.4 hectares of site will be complete, enabling us to bring forward much needed new investment in job growth. We will also commence work on the Silicon Sands Technical Demonstrator Pilot, a groundbreaking project that will see one of the first truly carbon-friendly approaches to the provision of modern liquid-cooled data centres using half the power of traditional data centres. It is also our ambition to explore how we could utilise the excess heat created by the centres to power district heating network, providing cheaper heating for homes and businesses in the town. Although there is plenty to choose from, perhaps this year's single biggest economic regeneration milestone will be the opening of the first phase of Blackpool's DWP offices, to be known as Filed View. We've all seen this new building go up fast opposite Bickerstaff on Talbot Gateway. Later this year, this building will be home to some 3,000 civil servants, providing a huge boost to our town centre with an expected daily desk occupancy of 1,800. We expect the building to be handed over by the contractor in the next few weeks, with some outside works continuing beyond this. A phased occupation will take place, and we expect the building to be fully utilised by the autumn. The new civil service building covers some 215,000 square feet of floor space and has been designed with an environmental sustainability in mind to achieve a BREEAM Excellent rating. This includes ultra-low energy fittings, high levels of insulation, low carbon heating and cooling and demand-driven ventilation, all helping to reduce the building's overall carbon footprint. The building also benefits from ground floor cycling facilities, including showers and changing facilities, a large reception lobby and a high-quality fit-out, including open-plan working areas, meeting rooms, quiet zones and other flexible workplace settings with high levels of natural daylight and generous airy ceiling heights. It is our ambition for this building to begin a process of consolidating thousands more government jobs into Blackpool Town Centre over the next decade. This building and 3,000 jobs is a great start, and it's just another example of how this Labour Council has turned a good idea into a solid reality for the benefit of Blackpool. With more office workers and students coming to the town centre, it's even more important that we have a good public transport system. Therefore, very pleased that we opened our tramway extension in May last year, reconnecting heavy and light rail in Blackpool. The council has invested 71 million in this new infrastructure. So far, over 100,000 people have boarded at the new station, which gives us a fantastic tram and train interchange to serve both Blackpool and the Fylde Coast. We will continue to invest in our highways network. This year, we'll see the first 5 million of improvements delivered as part of our town centre access scheme, together with over 2 million additional government money for highways maintenance. Now, I'd like to round off my summary of our achievements and ambitions for making Blackpool better in the year ahead by paying attention to the issue of climate change, our green spaces and environment. National coverage on these matters is increasingly depressing. It seems that with each passing day there is an even louder group of people all over the world who want to pretend that our shared climate isn't changing, that humankind should just carry on regardless and that we should just ignore the needs of future generations. We will not be following suit. We are determined to act where we can on climate change, protect our green spaces and environment and safeguard our children's future. And this means doing all kinds of things, big and small. I'm proud that in July 2024, we opened the Eco Hub at Palatine Library in July to bring the services delivering small-scale and deep retrofit measures, groundwork and cosy homes, together in the same building. The Hub has been shortlisted for national government-sponsored awards with an announcement on winners later this week. I'd like to quote from the shortlisting blurb. It all started with plans to decarbonise a library building, but the Eco Hub has quickly evolved into a multifaceted partnership service and delivery model, helping people to be wealthier, healthier and greener, by taking a flexible approach and seizing the opportunities arising from building new relationships with partners. The service now has the potential to reshape public services in Blackpool around our common need to tackle climate emergency. By the turn of the year, the eco-coaches who are based at the hub has saved residents a total of £45,000 in reduced energy bills during the ongoing cost of the living crisis and delivered a carbon saving of almost 100,000 kilograms. They are on track to have helped 1,500 households by April 2025 since the start of this project. Last year, we won 1.7 million of government funding to deliver hundreds of electric vehicle chargers via hubs across the borough, with procurement underway to find a private sector partner who will be expected to add to this pot. In addition, we have taken further steps to increase the rollout of solar power across the council estate, with the installation of 120 kilowatt of panels at the Winter Gardens, providing the equivalent amount of power to cover 3/4 of the illumination's electricity use. We will go further in 2025. We will deliver significant additional renewable energy projects across the town, with solar power planned at Palatine Leisure Centre, Leighton Depot, the Illuminations Depot, and a full planning application for a solar farm at Blackpool Airport. On top of this, and I'm always keen to give credit where it's due, we plan to install a wind turbine at Anchors Home Park, following a suggestion by the Leader of the Opposition. And I'm delighted that after many years, the Leader of the Opposition has finally had a good idea and one that accords with Labour priorities. We are committed to improving our parks and open spaces, and I am pleased that in the last year we've brought together some 30 tree warden volunteers, and we expect this number to grow as we continue to plant more trees. We have been successful in applying to United Utilities 1.8 million of funding for trees, with specialist tree pits to enhance tree canopy coverage across the town. This winter saw consultation on the Stanley Park Master Plan, and we are preparing funding bids at the back of this in conjunction with the Friends groups. Preparations are already underway to mark the centenary of the park in October 2026. We are proud that our park secured 3 green flags in 2024, and we are confident of more to follow this year. Members are aware of the need for continual investment in our sea defences. In 2024, we secured tens of millions of pounds of new investment from the Environment Agency for future schemes at Ankersholm, Bispham and wider beach management. These schemes will witness the construction of rock groins to prevent beach erosion, seawall repairs and other essential works across miles of our seafront. In the year ahead, we plan to invest the first 6 million of this funding. At the same time as all of this, Blackpool continues to give leadership on climate and environmental agenda across Lancashire through our work in running CHILL, Cosy Homes in Lancashire. CHILL is a Lancashire-wide programme that all Lancashire authorities can participate in. It leads a programme of work to address fuel poverty and decarbonisation of heating in people's homes. It targets those in greatest need, often facing ill health, living in properties that are not easy to insulate and heat. As a group of local authorities under CHILL, we bid for national resources such as Home Upgrade Grant 2 and have been awarded 29.6 million to target marketing to people and homes in greatest need. We have secured a further 2 million through the combined county authority to extend this work. Hundreds of households in Blackpool have already benefited from CHILL funding to improve their homes, reducing bills and reducing emissions, and many more of our residents will benefit in the future. Mayor, I am sure that you and everybody else is very relieved to know that I'm coming to the end of this speech. However, I'm sure that all members would agree that it has contained plenty of interesting and exciting detail. Most importantly, it contains evidence that supports my firm belief that whilst there is much to do, we are delivering a better Blackpool. We are absolutely determined to deliver for our residents and our businesses. We will continue to deliver the better jobs, homes, skills, start-up spaces, visitor offer, transport system, green spaces, environment and the public services that our residents and businesses need. This budget enables us to continue this work. As Labour Council delivered for Blackpool through the worst of the Tory chaos and austerity. It was tough, but being Northern, we knuckled down and we got on with it. We did the right things for the town again and again, and we're still standing when others have fallen. We now look forward with hope. We're excited to continue our work to deliver a better Blackpool, and we're excited to now be working with a government that is determined to rebuild local government and wider public services. Mayor, I am so proud to lead this Labour Council of the town that we all love. We are delivering a better Blackpool. I commend this budget to the Council.
you, Councillor Williams, and I'm sure that you're now enjoying a well-earned rest on that for the moment. Could you just take this opportunity to say that if anyone requires water during the course of this meeting, please just hold the cup up, because Dave over there has a jug of water and can come round the room and fill the cups up. I believe, Councillor Taylor, you're seconding the motion.
To second the proposal. I thought that was an excellent speech. One of the best I've ever heard in this chamber. And you might have expected, as every day we get up and we read what's happening elsewhere in the country in terms of local government, those who are going bust and all the rest of it. And you might think that a place like Blackpool perhaps would be one of them, and that the leader would have to get up today and make some kind of defensive speech about how difficult it was being, but nevertheless explaining away various things. Far from it. I think we must all feel very proud of our town and what's happening here. You've only got to go and look outside to see it. It's only a few years ago, it seems to me, when I used to drive into the town centre, there was a lot of poor housing and all the rest of it around there. And you can see the development going on. You can see the belief in the town and what's happening here. And I think a lot of people should take credit for that, but I particularly want to say our finance staff and all the rest of our local government officers do an excellent job for us. Every year we think, oh, here we go again, it's got to be a big problem. Every year it's a good news story at the end. But I want to particularly thank Lynn because I think that she shows tremendous energy, and I know that, and I witness that every day. The amount of energy that she's got, the work that she puts in, is unequalled. And I was leader for 10 years, but I didn't have anything like that kind of energy and drive that she's got. So we're very lucky, I think, to be served by the people we do have. And we're very lucky to be here in Blackpool, which is such a great place and so well run, if I may say so, by this authority. I feel you've got a hard work on here. I mean, I think elsewhere it would be a lot easier if you were in opposition, because I've been in your position for many, many years. You've got a tough one on here, but I'm sure you'll try, but you can't do it, mate, because it's too hard. It is a great place. You may as well join in the congratulations, because that's what it amounts to, and I think that's where the people of Blackpool feel about it. So I'm happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor. I will now invite Councillor Galley as the Leader of the Principal Opposition to reply to the budget speech.
Thank you.
Can I also point out,
Mr. Mayor.
equally, there is no time limit to your speech, Councillor.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I plan to take full advantage of that. Thank you, Councillor Taylor. I don't actually think you would want me to join you, but we will. I don't think you would want me. I don't think you would want me to join you. Don't worry, Councillor Taylor's clearly forgotten what he's just said. So, at the last full council, Mr. Mayor, I proclaimed that I was ashamed to be a Blackpool councillor. 4 weeks later, nothing has changed. We hear applause to a budget, Mr. Mayor, that rewards the highest council tax in Blackpool, in the country, in England, and at the same time gives us some of the lowest life expectancy. We have people in this town who are dying younger than they did just a few years ago. When the leader of this council became the leader, life expectancy in that time has gone down under her watch by just two more months, Mr. Mayor. Everywhere else it's rising. I feel ashamed. I wouldn't be applauding this budget, Mr. Mayor. And after tonight's speech that I intend to make, I believe there will be a clear separation between the political groups, because for far too long, almost a generation in this council, the Labour groups and the Conservative groups have been far too cosy in their relationship, and you couldn't separate them apart and what they actually stood for. And there needs to be absolute radical change in the way we govern, the way we operate, because things aren't as good as we've heard tonight, Mr. Mayor. They're not quite as good as Councillor Taylor has just made out when you drive to the town hall or walk or go use the public transport to get here. So what I intend to do, Mr. Mayor, in my speech tonight is go through a number of facts based on the updated report that I put together with Blackpool Nomics last year. And by all means laugh, but you're just laughing at facts and you're laughing at the truth. No, absolutely, by all means laugh. The truth has this annoying habit of offending us, Mr. Mayor, but it is always just that, the truth. So I intend to go through the updated numbers and the state of Blackpool's council's health. And then I will then go through the updates that we've done with Blackpool Nomics in terms of what it actually now is starting to do, which is predict things. And then I'm going to highlight some of the problems that we face in this town. And then I'm going to come up with the solutions. So in terms of trends, we looked at council tax, borrowings, children's, adults, our working balances, and then, as I say, we start with council tax, Mr. Mayor. So last year I looked at the data, and the data told us that we had some of the highest council tax in England. We have, for example, a higher council tax than Lytham, than Poulton. We go further afield, than Preston. Then we go further afield again, Cheshire East, a place that I've commented on previously because I used to live there. Some of the finest houses in the country are paying less than here in Blackpool. That then works further again to Stoke-on-Trent, an authority that again I spent a lot of time in and has some comparisons to this authority. So we find ourselves in a space where we're paying very high tax. So then let's have a look at that council tax, Mr. Mayor, if I can. So 2023 to 2024, when I first put Blackpool Nomics together, we had 72,012 houses in our council tax base. Move forward 2 years, 701 houses have now been added to that number. But not a lot else has changed. Band A's, for example, still make up the biggest number of banded housing in the town at 44.3% instead of 44.4%. Band B's, 29% instead of, 29.3% this year instead of 29% 2 years ago. Why is that significant? Well, it means when you combine those two bands, Mr. Mayor, we have 73.6% of our council tax base is based on two of the poorest bands in the band ratings. And that becomes significant as we start to look at who's on council tax reduction. 31.8% 2 years ago were on council tax reduction scheme. I am pleased to say, and this is why it is the truth, I've tried to be absolutely objective in this, those numbers have fallen, which is a good thing. So 31.8% is now down to 28.9% of our council tax bands in the array on council tax reduction scheme. A similar trend appears in Band B. 16.6% of Band B is now 14.6%. And that's a good thing. That means people have got more income coming in and therefore they no longer qualify for that. We'd like to think that's a good thing. However, it still is a problem, though, in terms of the first point I said, Mr. Mayor, because it means 18% still of our council tax banding overall in Blackpool of that 72,000 figure are on council tax reduction, which is a significant number when we look at the potential council tax we're not getting. We also now have a new bit of data that we've been able to secure, Mr. Mayor, and that is arrears data. This tells us the people that actually qualify for council tax but don't necessarily have either the means at that moment or are not paying it, so they can't and won't pay. So arrears data starts to give us some interesting information. And this starts to be quite significant. You'll spot the theme later, Mr. Mayor. So it tells us straight away the areas, the wards which are in the biggest arrears are Bloomfield, Claremont, parts of Talbot and parts of Waterloo wards. And Councillor Sloman will ask a question connected to that data later on. Now we look at single persons discount. Now, whilst we've seen a decline in a welcome decline in the people that are no longer qualifying for council tax reduction, because we'd like to think they're doing well, we do start to see a slight problem with our single persons discount. So single person discounts in A and B, interestingly, are slightly down. So 52% of A are now claiming single persons, and Band B, 38.8% are claiming. However, what is significant, and this starts to have a material impact in terms of the finances, Mr. Mayor, is that Bands C, D, E are up. That means more people in those bands are now claiming single persons discount. Now, why does that become significant? Overall, that affects the number of people in this town claiming it. Becomes quite a scary figure. It means, for example, only 53.1% of this town are actually paying full council tax. That figure's down, and that has declined by 3.89% in the last 2 years, which means our income has gone down overall. On average, a 1% increase in single persons roughly works out, on average, combining the different bands, to £100,000. So if that goes up by a percentage, we see a loss of our income to 100,000. So a 3% fall is a problem. And I suspect if the higher bands are starting to generate more single persons, we may be starting to see a behaviour change because council tax starting to become too high in those higher bands. Moving on to wages in Blackpool. So wages continue to be, and we've heard that referenced by the leader, some of the lowest, actually it was, apologies, it's you, Councillor Smith, I believe, who referenced that we've got some of the poorest wages. So 2024, 14.5% below the national average of wages in England. Scarily, bearing in mind how high those single persons figures are, the average female worker in Blackpool is on 23,321, and that's a full-time female worker. Now, what I suspect is predominant number of and we don't have any gender data for this, but I suspect a good number of those single persons will be female, and that means they're getting closer and closer to their income in terms of their fixed costs, and what their income is getting closer to the point where they start to reduce their spending. And there will be a certain point where they'll potentially have to go on to council tax reduction. Again, that has a material impact on our council's income. The other impact we're probably going to see is an increase in fraud. More and more people will not declare a partner for longer. Just a few months has a big material financial impact on our income, and we already know that by the work that has been done by the council's audit team in terms of counter fraud. They did an exercise and it already generated over 150,000 in people who shouldn't have been claiming single persons. But ultimately, though, for this economy to work, for some of the things that Councillor Smith is building, from cinemas across, it requires a strong domestic spend to keep those operations running in the winter, because you don't have the tourists here. So in order for them to operate in January or December, you need a strong domestic spending power to keep them going. If our residents on lower wages are paying more and more out in council tax, one of the things that they cut or rents is their domestic spend. So they stop spending in cafes, they stop spending at the new cinema because they have to tighten their belts. So it ultimately starts to affect some of the growth models that you're looking to generate more business rate income from. Moving on, let's have a look at debt, Mr. Mayor, if I may. 2017, 2018, and the leader referenced it, our debt as a council was 250 million. Obviously now it stands, as this very day, are at 622 million. Now the total interest rate payments on that are £25 million a year, Mr. Mayor. That roughly works out for every man, woman and child at £4,393. So a baby that hasn't even been born yet will be given immediately a bill for that figure the day they're born. And that is really significant, because when you borrow, it's another generation that will ultimately pay it back. Now, it's all very well saying that, oh, all these things will generate money. Well, we've already highlighted some that haven't. For example, the rope swings and so on. So there are concerns generally about where this money is coming from. And those interest rate payments do become significant if other authorities don't want to lend to us. That affects our short-term borrowing power. And that's equally significant when we start to look at impacts on inflation and what's going on in Ukraine and a whole new world that's coming. And Councillor Wilshaw will raise a point about that later. We now move on to adults, Mr. Mayor. Again, it's a regular service that sadly didn't used to, but has started to, and that is overspend. So the last 3 years, we've seen 3 sets of overspends, 2 million, 2 million, and 3.7 million. And that was last year, despite an increased budget of 9.4 million. Well, why is that significant? Well, it's been given a savings target, which the leader didn't reference tonight, of 3.7 million. We're making adults start to save. And Councillor Scott will raise a point, and I know Councillor Ellison the same later on about that. Children's overspends, 2011 till present, so this is as long as I've been a councillor. We currently see an overspend this year, Mr. Mayor, despite yet again another increased budget of 4.7 million. And whilst the leader will criticise us for being obsessed with numbers, well, numbers are an interesting thing, Mr. Mayor, because they're the things that allow us to fund the things that we care about. And if we get the numbers wrong, we can't do the caring things that we need to as a council. That's why numbers are important. And I'm not afraid or ashamed to say numbers matter. So let's have a look at what they've been given. Again, we've been promised a cut this year in children's services, Mr. Mayor. Again, the leader didn't reference that. Now, what's interesting there is we're told, well, the NHS can pay for the health-related elements, but they can only pay for the health-related elements of that report. What's also interesting, Mr. Mayor, is one of the things that the leader will often reference when she'll talk to the press is it's okay, we have fixed reserves, everyone. Wow, it's amazing. 21 million, doesn't that sound a lot? There used to be 70 million just 4 or 5 years ago. But when you actually start to break down what's in those fixed reserves, Mr. Mayor, there's only 340,000 left for children's. So we're taking a service that is overspent this year by 4.7 million and giving it a savings target. Yet we also, at the same time, have very little left in fixed reserves. And we'll talk about fixed reserves shortly. In terms of the trends, though, on children's services, again, very disappointing, highlighted it last year. We currently spend, residential care costs have gone up by 90 million in 12 years. So whereas internal fostering, Mr. Mayor, has seen 263 children in our care in 2013 and has now been reduced to 168 children in 2024. Councillor Carl Mitchell will highlight some of these points in his speech later. Working balances, Mr. Mayor. We've got a target of £8 million. At one point this year, and I raised it at different points, at different month end, we were forecast at one point to be 30,000. Now, Councillor Taylor is been around since 1973, I believe. You've been a councillor, obviously before, but you've ongoingly since 1973. In that time, you will recall lots and lots of discussions, I'm sure, about the importance of working balances and how councillors would froth and foam at the mouth at the very thought of us being below 5 million, 6 million. I do, because I was there for some of those meetings. The very fact that at 1 month end we were down to be 30,000 is absolutely terrifying. Just for a point of reference, Mr. Mayor, we actually finished up at 279. That was against a target of 8 million. Now that starts to flash problems, and I highlighted it at the time because what do you have to do? You have to backfill, and the backfilling is coming from children's and adults. So where are we now? Well, we've been given a new target of 7 million for working balances. Now, I did touch upon fixed reserves, Mr. Mayor, and I believe they are nothing more than a false comfort, because when we start to break down what those numbers look like, adults can draw upon 3.5 million in those fixed reserves. So that's comforting for them. However, of that 21 million, 9 million is already allocated for insurance costs. That only leaves 12 million. Another 4.5 million is allocated for lighting, and so on and so on. A lot of those fixed reserves are just that. They are fixed for other items. And what happens with children and adults when they start to inevitably overspend yet again? And now we move on to a new section in the report, and the leader, to her credit, referenced it, although very briefly, employers' national insurance, Mr. Mayor. So, again, this is causing huge concern around the country. One of the reasons I got cross at the last meeting was because it didn't seem to be a problem for the leader. Well, now we have the figures. So what do those figures tell us about the cost to Blackpool, Mr. Mayor? The total cost of national insurance increases by this new Labour government is going to be £5.9 million. They receive a government grant of 1.6 million, and that government grant is only a one-off according to a speech made in January in the House of Lords. There will be no more government grants to cover national insurance, and that also becomes significant later. But let's go back to that 5.9 million figure, Mr. Mayor, if I may. That then leaves the council a cost of 2.6 million, adult providers 2.2 million, companies are council-owned companies, bearing in mind one of those companies in January made a lot of redundancies. And I know those people, and I looked them in the eye, and no wonder I was cross, no wonder I feel ashamed, Mr. Mayor. 1.1 million, and there are more costs to come, because our suppliers, in entering into any new contract with the council, will put their costs up. They have to. As a business, that's the first thing you do. You either reduce your internal costs, or you put your prices up. Those companies that supply to us will put their prices up. So we will see inflationary pressure on those figures, Mr. Mayor. Now then, I did reference at the start of this speech, Mr. Mayor, that I've started to look at the model of Blackpoolnomics in a totally different way. And I've actually now got it to work in a way that actually starts to predict things. So it's a tool, it's an engine, Mr. Mayor. So based on all those data sources, I put them in, and I asked it to give me what it forecast our point, month 11, 10 and 12 to look like in 2026. And it was telling me at that point our working balances are going to be, by that point, 4.3 million. And our fixed reserves will be down to 17 million. Now that may sound good, and that's me being objective, because I could have easily fiddled those figures to make it look terrible. But I tried to be rational and fair, and it's really important that I stood up here tonight and was able to look everybody in the eye and said, this is what I honestly believe will happen. However, that assumes, Mr. Mayor, the following things. It assumes that there will be, the interest rates don't go up, and we'll hear from Councillor Wilshaw why that's a concern shortly. It also assumes that inflation doesn't go up. It assumes electricity doesn't go up, and that we settle on a 2.6% pay award for the staff. Now, every percentage pay increase we give roughly works out to be about £1 million. So if that award is higher, based on inflationary pressure, bearing in mind what's happening in the world since this budget was put together, those figures that I put together on the objectives there start to change significantly. And that becomes a real problem for us, which is why we have to, Mr. Mayor, start to get on top of those costs on those outgoings in adults and children's, because we literally don't have the fixed reserve flexibility that we have had to deal with that. There is no cushion. We reference a lot about the fair funding deal, Mr. Mayor, that may be coming, and I think everybody agrees that the more money we get, the better it is for us, and no one disagrees with that. The problem we've got, though, we've already seen, Mr. Mayor, just in the last week, strong rumours about how do we increase defence spending. And traditionally when that happens, you take that from other sources. So we cannot rely on fair funding being the answer. The answer has to come as much from ourselves, just in case we don't get that because of external events based on what they're likely to create, as well as different funding pressures. Because as we know, and we've seen it before, I I've apologised before on behalf of what the Conservatives have done in the past, but they do not always appreciate local government and what it does. And so we are incredibly vulnerable, Mr. Mayor, in this particular area if we do not get on top of those costs. Now, Mr. Mayor, what I've then started to do was, as I said, referenced earlier, was change what this model actually does. So Blackpoolnomics is now working out for me a set of numbers based on what I think would happen when I put everything in. And then I realised it needed to be a solution. Economic models don't really sell themselves to the public. They don't really connect with them, and we need to be looking at solutions here. There's no point just standing up and saying how bad this is or how bad that is. We need to be part of a solution. So what I roughly worked out, Mr. Mayor, just by walking around and looking at what Blackpool looks like and looking at the data that we have coming through. So we have the lowest life expectancy. We have big numbers of deaths based on alcohol. Scarily, it's called poisoning, Mr. Mayor. Poisoning, it's a horrible term. And when I read this, actually, I got quite upset because it starts to feel like I'm some sort of Victorian councillor now when I start to look at this data. So, for example, we have in Bloomfield, Mr. Mayor, 30%, the biggest number of deaths, are based on poisoning. I was like, what is that? What is poisoning? Well, poisoning, Mr. Mayor, is all those things. It's everything from alcohol, it's drugs, and so on, 30%. We're looking at the data. Our life expectancy in this town, Mr. Mayor, in those wards, the wards I referenced earlier in terms of the wards that have the biggest arrears, Bloomfield, parts of Talbot, parts of Waterloo and Claremont, their average life expectancy is 68. You start getting ill in those wards, Mr. Mayor, when you're 52. And you don't get better. And when I looked at that, I was really upset. This isn't on, and this is why I feel ashamed. That's a lower life expectancy in those wards than Libya, Western Sahara. We're venturing into also a place that I knew very well, Sub-Saharan Africa. And this is happening in our town. We have created 2 Blackpools, in effect, Mr. Mayor. It's almost a policy in this town. So we have one Blackpool that has nice parks, it pays its council tax, and we have the data now that proves that. And they live longer, 79.5% on average. They get ill when they're older, so late 60s rather than early 50s. And I'm not happy about this, Mr. Mayor. None of us should be. This has happened under a generation of different Blackpool councillors, and I'm one of them. And it's not good enough, Mr. Mayor, because what's starting to happen is one of the reasons we've got a higher council tax is because we need the income. So therefore, one part of the town is now having to pay to cover the arrears of another. And what's starting to happen is that part of the town is now affected because it's struggling to pay those council tax increases. So nobody's winning in this deal, these two Blackpools. And as a policy, we've allowed it to happen. And I'm truly, truly ashamed because as my time as a councillor, life expectancy's got lower in the town that I live in. And how does that feel right? It doesn't feel right, and it isn't right, Mr. Mayor. It's awful. It's wrong, and it cannot continue. It cannot continue. We have to do something about it. So our solution, Mr. Mayor, links very much into the budget, and that is rather than 2 Blackpools, was to create a 1 Blackpool policy. And at 7 o'clock tonight, a video is uploaded onto YouTube which will explain exactly how that policy will work. But to give you a summary of it, that we can no longer ignore ignore one Blackpool and the other Blackpool, that they have to work together. We then looked at how, because despite the leader of the council telling us it may take decades, we don't have decades. If we carry on as we are, what will happen to the area surrounding Bond Street? Councillor Mitchell, every full council will talk about Bond Street. When are we going to get that master plan that you promised us in the last election in 2023? And well, it may happen, we'll have a meeting about it separately at some point. Well, it never happens, and it's not going to change. And it needs to change, because what starts to happen, the broken window syndrome, is people then start to leave the area. And those landlords that we've all talked about tonight, that we've all suffered from in the past in our wards, start to take over. And most of all, the people then suffer. So one of the areas that we've then focused on, Mr. Mayor, is a complete restructuring of this council. Far too often, Mr. Mayor, we've all come across an officer that will tell us, oh, if only these guys would answer an email. And who are these guys? They're another department. Mr. Mayor. Instead of focusing on delivery, we've become a council that's focused on following its own rules that should enable delivery but don't, because we've lost that focus on why we're here. So it's almost a rebuild. And part of that is that we'll create a whistleblowing system that deals with this barrier for officers, Mr. Mayor. It will liberate them. It will allow them to dare to be different. It will populate that risk register that we see for every service with opportunities, new ways of working, ways that focus on actually delivering projects. Because I am so frustrated as I have seen the decline of delivery, the amount of times I've had to rescue an officer from a problem before it's happened. And you quoted me on that. Thank you, by the way, for that, about that windmill. Well, the reason I came across that because nobody else was doing it. And it's the social entrepreneur aspect, the 21st century councillor that we first talked about, which got me excited about becoming a councillor leader. And we need to be more focused on that. It needs support for our officers. It needs mentorship for them, giving them the skills. It needs independent support outside of the council, but with people with commercial knowledge in order to support them, because they are dealing with the commercial sector who clearly take advantage of them. Now, one of the areas of One Blackpool is to totally restructure the shareholders board. We don't feel the shareholders board it works at all, Mr. Mayor. It's dominated by one individual and at the expense of commercial sound judgment and delivery. And we would replace that board with a Blackpool Companies board. And that board, Mr. Mayor, would have independent members on it with commercial knowledge. People who understand how business works. How refreshing that would be, Mr. Mayor, the input they could provide. Then we would look at the communications team. We would disband the communications team, Mr. Mayor, with great pleasure. We would then unite it with a whole new communications team across all the council-owned companies. And those companies, Mr. Mayor, would have the same marketing focus. It would be proactive. It would be really keen to reach out to the public, because it has a new role, Mr. Mayor. Part of its role will be to support fostering. For years we talked about the problem, but we never do anything that addresses it. Apart from limited support, it needs a far new, stronger way of addressing this issue. And that is a new communications team, a new marketing team of Blackpool with the right skills to address this key area that will grow our foster carers, will reduce costs around all of the companies, because it'll be one team working in a united way to deliver One Blackpool. And then we move on to tourism and regeneration. A service that I've seen so many projects behind on. It's used different methodologies and different projects, and we're constantly disappointed by its performance. The impact, growth and prosperity have had on these figures in 25-26 has been a disaster. This is where, before we even talk about what it's been going on with the Hounds Hill, Mr. Mayor. So our focus will be to replace it with a One Blackpool directorate, to really focus on regeneration, not just of the town centre, but on all of the inner wards, for the reasons I said earlier, to unite the focus, rightly so, on our poorest people in the poorest housing, giving them access to green space, and not just encouraging them to walk, as Councillor Hugo would, or tell us it's only 15 minutes away, and you've never taken me up on that challenge, by the way, to get to Stanley Park. It's about putting green spaces in the places that people live. And how would we do that, Mr. Mayor? Well, we would focus, and it was really interesting, I thought, Mr. Mayor, that the Prime Minister went to Nanselsden in Cornwall with the Deputy Prime Minister, with His Majesty the King a few weeks ago, because they're working on the Poundbury model. And the ownership model around that is really interesting. It mixes housing together, so poor aren't ghettoised over here and rich are ghettoised over there. It's mixed, good housing, but on an ownership model and a deeds model as well. So you don't suddenly get the buy-to-let landlords piling in and turning them into holiday homes. And it creates good housing, healthier communities, and I felt it was really interesting. I was absolutely delighted. I was shocked by some on the right who criticised the King for working with the Prime Minister. I thought it was absolute bonkers. It was absolutely the right thing for the Prime Minister to do. It was absolutely the right thing for His Majesty to do. He's been passionate about good housing for a long, long time. And the model works, and I feel that would replicate itself really well in some of those poorest areas of Blackpool. And the reason that we'll do that is it's based around the health numbers. It's based around, Mr. Mayor, those financial figures. We cannot continue as we are. We do not have decades, as the leader said. Now, the other thing that we would do in order to support that, because the master plan on the grant that we've got so far does talk about the role of the private sector to be decided, if I'm right, at a future date. Well, that needs to happen now. Blackpool has a huge number, Mr. Mayor, of what's called sole traders and small developers, and they don't feel there's a place for them in Blackpool at the moment. And what's required, Mr. Mayor, is that we create a Blackpool investment company that allows people to invest in it, allows those small developers, it allows the sole traders to actually start to work on projects in those areas rather than relying on those big investors, often international, who will, as we've seen in Manchester, with Andy Burnham turning everything into skyscraper central, is they're often all purchased by overseas investors from China and the Far East, and with really high rents, and you eventually you gentrify the area. This is about local people investing small amounts of money to deliver a return, small developers delivering on those projects. So the other area that we wanted to develop, and I was really disappointed. I spent a lot of time down in the Living Road area over the years, based on my enthusiasm for Heritage Rail. And one of the things that I've always been disappointed about is that if I go to Ankersholm, I've got access to 2 parks and a library. If I go to Living Road, I don't have access to any of those things. So already things are working against me. So one of the things that we want to do, Mr. Mayor, in this budget, and we worked out a way that we can finance it, is that we would invest in the opening of a new library in Blackpool. And it will be on Living Road, Mr. Mayor. And this library will do all the things that Ankersholm Library does. It will operate like a community centre. It will be the space where you can go as a young mum, as an elderly person, to meet new people. Because I imagine loneliness is just as strong there as it is in the areas that I represent. And it will give the people there the same rights and facilities that they deserve, and the same rights and facilities that they expect in Ankersholm. The other thing that we will do that is different and a sea change, Mr. Mayor, is adult services needs a new way of thinking. We're already picking this up in healthcare practices across the world, and it's starting to affect the way we do care in the United Kingdom. And that is that we would move parks and leisure services into adult services. And the reason we want to do that, Mr. Mayor, is that we would work on the basis that One Blackpool needs one coordinated service that helps prevent poorly health based on isolation, lack of physical activity, and link that into preventative care. And and as somebody who's been criticised for a long time for planting flowers in different places in the ward, I always did it because I knew it made people feel better. I didn't know what it was called, Mr. Mayor. It turns out that it's called social prescription. The NHS are very good at giving things a nice-sounding name. But there is a great opportunity there for us to link all this together in terms of the practice, because that's then a cultural change for adult services to see how they do unite, and that actually going into a park is actually good for our minds and our souls. And that the poorest of the people, The people with drug issues and alcohol issues deserve that right as much as somebody who lives in a nicer area. And we're absolutely committed to that change, Mr. Mayor. We would also create a new dynamic tourism head designed to be much more in our faces as regards tourism in the Blackpool and the offer around the world. And of course, I couldn't forget, as a conclusion, council tax, Mr. Mayor. I've already highlighted that it's some of the highest in the country, and I generally fear, based on numbers, that the impact that's starting to have on those higher bands is that people are looking at ways of how not to pay it, how to avoid paying it, and that's only going to increase the higher it goes. So part of this, Mr. Mayor, is, and it's very much based on the Laffer curve, that the higher your tax goes up, the less income you actually end up getting, is that we will freeze council tax. And that's something I'm absolutely convinced on as an economic model, that without doing that, we eventually punish the people. And it is the job of the council to support the people, Mr. Mayor, not the job of the people to support the council. And somehow we've forgotten that. We exist for the people, not the other way around. And that's what our focus should be. Now, how would we pay for that, Mr. Mayor? So I put a section here at the back, and I'm quite happy again to send this to the Labour group, but we worked on a series of costs. Counter fraud, for example, Mr. Mayor, we believe there's a lot more to be had on working on people in single person's discount, and we believe there's still an estimated £200,000 of savings there. We will dissolve diversity and equality and move that across into HR. This will save us £75,000. We've already highlighted that we will dissolve the communications department and replace it with a new One Blackpool marketing team. This will save us £200,000. We will review temporary accommodation providers, and we believe this will save us £100,000. And we will create the Blackpool remodelling team to review all the adult care packages and the private sector and the way they manage those accounts to the council. We believe there are significant savings there. The library on Living Road, Mr. Mayor, you'll be pleased to know that we will reduce the councillor allowances that Labour have been so enthusiastically voting for these last 3 years. We will reduce the number of portfolio holders. We have reviewed all of you. We look at how many press releases that you've done, how many times you're turning up to meetings, and not all, some of you do a very good job, and I'm looking at one of you now, I won't name them in person, but I'm looking at them, do a really good job. But some of you, we don't even know what you actually do. So we will remove some of those. So the merger of young people and aspirations with children's, for example, merger of climate change, communities and well-being with community safety, street scene and neighbourhoods, and we will remove the cabinet assistant posts. This will save £100,000. We'll also remove the post of the Director of Strategy and the Assistant Chief Executive. This will save us £105,000. And this isn't without precedent. When I first started, Mr. Mayor, back in 2011, the Labour leader at the time, Councillor Blackburn, stood with that very same podium and made a grand speech about the cost of democracy in this town, how much we were paying all these senior officers. And straight away, some of them started to disappear. And he used those savings to fund certain projects at the time that the leader, as he was at the opposition, and then the leader of the council, was absolutely adamant about delivering. So again, we believe there will be some significant savings in that area. We would increase empty property officers from 1 to 3. We believe there's a significant saving, at least around 4 million council tax lost in this area. And we believe we can, at least in the first year, generate around 500,000. The new Blackpool One Directorate, we don't expect it to make any money in its first year as it rebuilds, but in years 2 and 3 we believe it will be a deliverer of both change, Mr. Mayor, and also start to deliver significant savings that we're just not seeing currently with growth and prosperity. We'd also review Mr Mayor, there are many Microsoft 365 licences that this council has as well. And we would look at a full review on how we're operating those licences and who needs them, and do they really need them. We believe, again, there are significant savings to be made on those licences. The library on Living Road, I've already talked about how we will save. There's obviously conversations that we've had around our input into children's services and fostering. And then we start to look at the long-term game. This is just a budget, an alternative budget, Mr Mayor, that will get us through the first year and start to address 26 to 27. That's a big year, because at the moment our only ticket in town is to hope we don't have a war that escalates in Ukraine, we don't suddenly ramp up our defence spending to 3%, and if not, and inflation doesn't go up and we don't start having to pay our staff more than 2.6. If any of those things don't happen, then we'll be okay. But if we don't, then we've got a real problem on our hands. And this is what this budget is designed to address. So our long-term plan, as ever, is to push on this Blackpool Investment Company. It was the same model that worked in Singapore, and it will work here. In 1960, Singapore, for anybody that doesn't know, Mr Mayor, was a lot poorer than Blackpool in the 1960s. And like a league table, we've been relegated a couple of leagues. These guys have been promoted into the Premier League, and we need to copy the models that they've worked, but in a way that we can legally in the United Kingdom, because I appreciate we do not have the power that President Lee had. So we'd also create the Blackpool Carbon's Credit scheme, and that will pay for the much-needed green spaces in this town, because at the moment we are obsessed with car parks. We're obsessed, Mr Mayor, building parks for cars and not people. And every opportunity we get, what do? We put some more tarmac down, because cars are the boss. They're the ones that pay. And one of the things that we're arguing in this budget, Mr Mayor, is mental health and physical health. Whilst they don't have a price value, they are invaluable to us as people, and they do have a price. And it's one of the next pieces of work I'm going to do is start to work out what that price actually is. And that way we'll be able to adapt what the leader said, which was knowing the price of everything and the value of nothing. It's so important that we're able to do that. I was also pleased that the leader referenced again the wind model that we're pushing. One of the reasons I'm really keen to see wind adapted in Blackpool is that moving forwards, as Germany runs out of its rubbish coal and struggles to get more from the east and starts to suffer as a result of its energy crisis, one of the things that this country has, certainly Blackpool, is unlimited wind supply. It's non-stop. I've never known such a windy place. So we really need to be tapping into that. So the Anchor Zone project is actually a trial. If we get that to work in an urban environment, then we've got something we can potentially sell. Because currently we're paying a huge amount of money on our electric bills. It's 4.25 million. It's down from 5 million, evenly split between lighting and the use of the council. We are so exposed to those bills going back up, so the more we can generate ourselves, certainly around that, the better. So at this point, Mr Mayor, I set out with the agenda that Blackpool politics should never be the same again. That this side would reference something that was different from what Labour are going to offer, what Reform are going to offer, what Blackpool Conservatives can stand here, look everybody in the eye and say that we have a model that will not only predict, but will actually start to answer some of those questions, to deal with the two Blackpools. There is a policy, I'm convinced it's a policy, Mr Mayor, because we never put a levelling up bid in to address anything on Living Road, and this budget doesn't address anything that to do with some of our poorest areas, Mr Mayor. Certainly around Bond Street, it will look exactly the same in 12 months' time as it does today. And this budget, our alternative budget, does just that. So I'm happy to recommend our alternative budget. I know Labour will never do anything with it, but you have a major problem on your hands. You laugh, you snigger, you can ignore it as much as you want. The truth never, ever lies to us. And what the truth tells us is we have a major problem coming if we don't get on top of those figures, because I fear, Mr Mayor, we have a big problem coming from the east, and it will affect the fair funding deal that you're all relying on to get you out of this fix. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. It's now open for general debate. Have we anybody? Councillor Barton and Councillor Hobson.
Well, Councillor Galley, you might be cross. I'm furious. Because I think you live in a completely different Blackpool to what we live in. Right? You've spoke there, you talked rhetoric for what, 10, 15 minutes. You've never really explained how you're going to pay for what you're going to do. You've got a document there that's not shared with anybody, so we don't know what's in it. I'm fearful of conservative economic policies because the last time we had one nationally under Liz Truss, it crashed the whole economy. And we ended up, we were all worse off. Now, you're right. There are some terrible things in Blackpool that inflict us. You know, the average life expectancy is poor. But there's reasons for that. Poverty is the main reason for that. Poor housing, poor education, poor job prospects. And what we are trying to do on this side of the chamber is change that by regenerating the town, by improving that housing, and it doesn't happen overnight. It does sometimes take a generation to do that sort of thing and turn it around. You are disillusioned if you think that's going to happen overnight. You really are. And the Singapore model, I mean, my God, Singapore is a country, in '62, it moved away from Malaysia. And the reason why it's a powerhouse in the region is because it's got an open immigration policy. It welcomes everybody in from all over the world on its banking and its financing and its IT. So what are you proposing that we declare, you know, an official declaration of independence from the rest of the UK and become an island state like Singapore? There are so many wonderful things that are happening in this town that you on that side should be saying, despite 14 years of government cuts to all council budgets, and despite that, we are creating trying to create a better place, you know. And you're right. The council tax system as it is bad. You know, unfortunately, Blackpool has got a disproportionate amount of properties in A and B. Unlike the two councils in the country that do the lowest council tax, which is Westminster, and I think it's, I can't remember the other one, but they've, you know, Belgrave and all those wonderful, not many A and B properties down there, is there, you know? And I dare say, I can't understand, you're talking about a single woman living in a E-banded property. I can't see that poor person being on minimum wage. I honestly and truthfully think that the rhetoric that's coming from the opposite side there is dumbfounding. And I'm not saying that you should praise this, and you should be bringing this to account, but my God, you're living in a different world than I am.
Councillor Hobson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillor Galley referenced an overspend in children's services, specifically around residential costs, and that is correct. However, a quick Google will see that Blackpool Council are not the only councils who are struggling to meet the cost of residentials. In fact, most councils will overspend on children's services this year. I would point out that from 2010 to 2014, councils of every colour, Labour, Tory, Lib Dem, have been screaming at the government to do something about the extortionate costs of residential. So I was very pleased to see that the new government, within 4 or 5 months, have already instructed the Department for Education to issue a white paper called Keeping Children Safe, Helping Families Thrive, specifically to address the issue of profiteering from these companies. If I just pick Councillor Galley up on another couple of points, though, he referenced before about the lack of master plan planning on Lytham Road. Myself and Councillor Mrs Mitchell attended a meeting last Thursday, and then we attended one 2 Thursdays before that, so I'm sure she'd be delighted to fill you in on the progress on that. And also, Councillor Galley said there wasn't a park on Lytham Road. He obviously hasn't looked at a map and seen George Bancroft Park, which is an 11-minute walk from the tram depot. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Looking for any further speakers? Yeah, Councillor Bradley Mitchell.
There's countless issues with this budget, but sadly I don't have an hour to try and put everyone to sleep. for which can I say I think this took longer than a parliamentary budget to deliver. No issue annoys me more than the Labour Council increasing council tax by the maximum yet again, with which the leader has already defined as regressive, whilst voting multiple times for their own pay rises in recent years, directly taking money away from our most vulnerable residents and putting it into their own pockets. But in my limited time, I want to highlight Labour's campaign in recent years that was supported by a partisan director of finance to produce a ludicrous and meaningless figure of over £1 billion of cuts to Blackpool Council. As I've been saying for a while, this council has faced budget pressures every year of its existence, no matter which party is in national government. And this year is no different. Despite your fawning over the Labour government, if we do the same ridiculous calculation on the 8.6 million in required cuts in this year's budget, then we're on track for another £1 billion of accumulated malarkey cuts, similar to under the Conservatives. With the vast majority of this pressure forced on this council due to National Labour's failed budget, forcing national insurance increases on councils that hasn't nearly been adequately funded, as Councillor Galley stated, stalling growth, inflation and national debt rising, a destroyed jobs market and long-term predictions looking bleak, to say it politely. Will the leader finally admit these outlandish figures were baloney, or call this austerity like you did with the Conservatives in the last few years?
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wilshaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The 25-26 budget assumes a net expenditure of 218 million, 4.99% council tax rise and reserves of just 7 million by March 26, with the risk of higher inflation eroding purchasing power, lower economic growth squeezing revenue and potential higher interest rates increasing borrowing costs. Can the leader explain what contingency plans are in place to protect residents and services if these economic pressures worsen? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Michelle Scott.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Sorry, can't see without them. Councillor Galley's already reminded the Chamber that despite over a £9 million increase in 24-25, adult services still finished with a 3.7 million overspend. And in the draft budget savings proposal, we're told that £3,450,000 worth of savings are going to be achieved through implementation of strengths-based assessment and commissioning model. That's in 2 areas, and also the implementation of evidenced programme of single-handed care. If you can be so confident that those measures and models are going to create those budget savings, then I would ask why that's not been put in place previously. And as it hasn't been put in place previously, how can you be confident that that level of savings is going to be achieved? Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Coleridge.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. On average, over the last 5 years, we've overspent in children's services by around £5 million a year. I've asked about these overspends since becoming a councillor due to its effects on our residents through council tax and all the other services that get starved of funds. It's often hard to criticise spending around children, as we have a duty to look after any child that needs our help, and this has always been the answer when bringing this up. However, this year we're cutting our budget when we normally increase it. We know that national insurances will take effect with our suppliers. How can we possibly cope when this takes effect? The budget for next year is £1 million short on last year's budget and £5 million short on the 24-25 outturn. If we continued the trend of setting this year's budget as last year's outturn, we would expect to have a budget of around 84 million. If we then overspend as normal in the 25-26 outturn, we could be at 89 million. This would be an extra £11 million. Where will this money come from if we follow this usual trend? How will we accommodate our most vulnerable children when they need us? If this was possible, why have we not done it before? We need a regulatory body that looks at why costs for private residential homes are so high, change regulations to assist in bringing down these extortionate costs, and introduce a cap. It should not cost £300,000 a year to look after a young person. Locally, we would look to purchase our own children's homes and also look to our voluntary sector for support in running them. We'll talk with other councils that have successfully started down this path for advice. Everyone responsible for children's services wants to improve quality, which I understand, but we then avoid running our own residential homes. Staff don't want the responsibility and risk. We need to look at this and incentivise this area so we can get some commitment. We would work hard to recruit foster carers and increase the allowances for specialist foster carers to look after some of our children in residential homes. We would look at what stops potential foster carers coming forward. I suspect too much red tape and policies that stop carers making our children part of the family. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I'm allowed to speak once. I might raise a few points while I'm in the position of to speak. Did a bit of research. I'm a bit of a sort of, I do like numbers of council. Steve Thompson, Finance Director, which we know is respectable with finance. The cost of inflation since 2011 to current date is 45%. That's not my figure. That's based on the Bank of England calculator. Okay, so don't just make it up. I like to do my research. 45% equals circular of 225 million based on the core spending budget of the council of 500 million. That was back in 2011. I was around since, like yourself, was elected in 2011. The core spending budget of the council now is still around 500 million. But now we're doing a lot more for 500 million. Since then, we've increased activity in children and adults. Also, we have public health and family hubs also responsible of the council. So we need to consider that increase would have been, if we had inflation, if we had the money that we hadn't spent, and we had the money today, it would have been over 725 million. The budget cuts over the last 13 years of a Conservative government equals £220 million. So that sort of equates to the increase in spending the council had or would have done. So what we've done is we've still spent some money, but with less money, doing less than what we got. The compound effect of that, I think Councillor Mitchell was trying to get the figures out, over the 14 years is £1.8 billion taken out of the spending power of Blackpool Council. We could do a lot. If we was given a cheque tomorrow with £1.8 billion, which has been removed from the core spending power of the whole council over the last 14 years, what transformation we could do within that. But unfortunately, we're not going to get that back. What we have received since we've had a Labour government, we've had a better settlement in our finances this year. But doesn't compensate for the vast sort of extreme cuts from 13 years of a Conservative government. It's going to take a long way to move forward from where we had. Go back 14 years, we've probably got a third less staff working here, but all doing this. But what we have got is still doing the same work as everybody else is doing, but more, to deliver quality public services for our residents of Blackpool. So that's the speech I had lying ahead regarding that. I was a bit concerned when Councillor Galley was on about the debt we're putting on the residents of Blackpool. Every loan, every structured loan we have is based on the financial return model. So the interest paid on that comes from a structure that for potential borrowing to pay for the borrowing. So we loan money out and we get a payment back, and sometimes majority we get more than we borrow, so it covers the cost of the borrowing we do. So,
Councillor, I'm sorry, but you're on a red line.
I'm sorry, Chair.
Sorry about that. Have we any further speakers? Councillor Sloman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Galley, short time ago, took us back to 1973. Councillor Taylor, you would perhaps remember that. I'm going to take you back 2,000 years. 2,000 years ago, a cockerel crowed, heralding one of the greatest betrayals of all time. Fast forward 2,000 years, and the cockerel crowed again, heralding yet another betrayal. 3 times in one speech alone, Keir Starmer crowed, "Labour will freeze your council tax." Not 1 penny on your council tax, he crowed. No, not 1 penny. But this Labour council, under his Labour government, don't want that 1 penny. They want our pounds, and in some cases, hundreds of pounds. It's going to be very difficult for people to find that money. We are asking our people to pay more and more for less and less, and we simply cannot keep squeezing residents who pay their dues until their pips squeak to bankroll any more flawed financial schemes and shoulder the burden of an increasing number who are paying less and in some cases paying nothing at all. I, for one, cannot support any rise in council tax until I can look the people of Norbeck in the eye and say we are getting value for money and the level of service that reflects what we're paying for. And the only evidence I've seen of anything getting frozen has been our pensioners, unfortunately, this winter. And just, I'm about principles. I'm not necessarily pounds and pence. I'm not money savvy. But I did take issue, Leader, when you sort of imputed in your statement earlier on that the people on this side of the chamber would only see people in need who came to us in desperation in terms of pounds and pence. Empathy, compassion and concern are not the exclusive domain of socialism. They exist within all of us, as does our humanity. Thank you.
Councillor Hugo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, thank you, Councillor Sloman. Compassion and empathy are not just for this side of the bench, but when I sit here and hear the opposition speech, I hear words like ashamed, scared, mistrusting of our residents, suspicions of fraud from our residents, talking about punishing the people in your plans. And I think so much information has been put to us tonight that I would welcome the circulation of our leader's speech and also the leader of the opposition's speech so we can do some fact-checking. The leader of the opposition talks about Premier Leagues and relegations, and I'm not particularly into football, but to me, the one Blackpool is more like fantasy football. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Sean Brooks.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wasn't going to speak tonight, but we talk about creating one Blackpool and a clear divide between these two sides. Well, I've had the privilege of looking at last year's Blackpool nomics, and the plan last year seemed to be you wanted more C and D properties and less A and Bs, and yet last month, this party stood over there and called our plans for the redevelopment of Central Blackpool gentrification. Talks about several pressures and overspends, children's services, adult services. These are people we're talking about. These are our people whose A and B properties, perhaps, you don't want. You want Cs and Ds to close the council tax spend. We talk about this. The reality is that the numbers in Blackpool nomics last year do not add up. We can't just build bigger houses. We can't change historical boundings that were set in 1992 or whenever they were set. And we've actually got fundings in our policy now that are working. You know, we're putting forward plans that work. We've had difficult situations set by the Treasury, of which has been a Conservative government for 14 years on one-year settlements. It's been very difficult. But we've also got the privilege tonight of you telling us about your video you published. Now, perhaps unluckily for me, it's not gone viral yet, Paul, but I was the 13th viewer. You talk about an investment company in there. We already have one with the housing companies. That's what we're doing, that kind of thing. You talk about redeveloping the town centre. What about that DWP building? What about all the investment that's happening? You talk about a new library. In the austerity years, we kept all our... I sat in that group room and I watched as a lay delegate as we stood up and we kept our libraries open in Blackpool when these places you're comparing us to, Polton and Lytham, closed their libraries. Yes, they did. You talk about 2 new parks. I would support more parks, especially in the town centre. I would support more green space. My Strava is evidence that you can actually get to Stanley Park in 15 minutes. I do it regular. Walk to town, walk back to my house. You can do it. But there's also parks at either end of Lytham Road. There's George Bancroft Park you can get to. There's Watson Road Park you can get to. There's one by the health centre down there at the bottom. There's plenty of parks down there. You talk about a carbon credit offset scheme. These are just plans for developers. What you've done in this video is lots of colouring in, lots of Labour ideas, and for someone who wants so many things in libraries, there's no apostrophe in 2 Blackpools, Paul. So thank you very much, and I'll leave it at that.
Right. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Neil Brooks.
It makes me proud. Councillor Brooks, another Councillor Brooks is getting derision from the other side of the chamber. just wanted to come back on one or two things that were raised about adult services. First of all, I'm quite proud of the fact that we've cut no services. We don't count pounds, shillings and pence in relation to social care. We talk about the people. And if somebody needs help, we make sure that that's there to give them help. And yeah, you're right. Why haven't we done it before? You're right, because we haven't done it before. We haven't talked about how we can increase the support for people and work smarter. We're talking about things like using technology, using digital stuff, using hoists and lifts. So instead of sending 2 people to get somebody in and out of bed, we can probably send 1 because we've invested to save. We've spent some money, we've put a hoist in there so that 1 person can go. And who knows, that 1 person might get to know going and 2 different people going at night. Because it's about community support, and that's also in there. We're talking about community solutions, and I think Councillor Mitchell talked about more voluntary services being involved. We actually commission social care to take somebody shopping. How are we doing that? When there's community groups, there's neighbours that should be helping to pick that up. And we're going to try and connect people with their communities again. I mean, silly things like, if somebody has to get shopping, why can't we buy them a tablet and let them do online shopping? It'll be cheaper than sending somebody once a week at 20 quid an hour to do the shopping if we buy them a tablet and show them how to do internet shopping. That's the sort of solution we're looking at. It's about looking at people's circumstances and doing the best for them. It's not about pounds and pence, but we're quite proud of the fact we haven't cut any services to anybody. We're about supporting people.
Thank you, Councillor. Anyone else wishing to speak? Councillor O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It was nice to hear Councillor Galley talk about what he would do if he was in charge. That boat sailed. It isn't coming back. But also, though, Keir Starmer did say, not another penny. Not another penny, yet here we are debating essentially a 5% increase in council tax. That figure's not kind of lost. Essentially, you gave yourself a de facto pay rise of the same amount last month. But realistically, what we've seen in the last 14 years is council tax double in about the last 14 years. But what have the residents seen as a consequence of that? Well, lower life expectancy, becoming one of the most dangerous towns in England, and constantly been in the top 10 of the most deprived areas in the UK. But we've got car parks, we've got a nice kind of improvement to the area around the council offices, and a tram track. You kind of call this strategic vision. Sometimes I can't help but think this council's strategic vision needs a white stick and a Labrador. But over here, though, for all Labour can't offer for us, what we've got is a party which can't offer anything better than them. You're the reason why they're in power. There's no other option. There's been no other better candidates than those people sat over there. That's why they're there, and that's why they're in charge. Now, you could say the Tory party have lost their way. People don't know what the Tory party stands for anymore. But the more worrying thing is, I don't even think the Tory party knows what they stand for these days. But it's almost like now, you look at this chamber, and you look at where the polls are right now. In Blackpool, Reform are polling at around 40%. That essentially makes you people squatters. The population have no real confidence in you anymore. Last month, I had to sit through a debate which saw every side of this, everyone on that side there, vote against a public inquiry into the grooming gangs, and I think that's shameful. But I don't think there's much of a debate to be had here tonight, because the same thing's going to happen. You're all going to vote for another, essentially, 5% increase in council tax.
Right, we're still in general debate. Are there any further speakers? No. Okay, then it's the reply by the leader of the council, Councillor Lynn Williams.
Jesus, right, okay. Councillor Galley, you started off your speech with saying that you were ashamed and remained ashamed. I would have been ashamed if I had been a councillor for as long as you had and wasn't aware of the potential risk of child sexual exploitation to our children. And I would have been further ashamed that when I became aware of it, that the first thing that you did was political grandstanding rather than actually finding out what we were doing to protect those children. You could have taken it to scrutiny, but no. It became a political hot issue and you brought a motion here. It's true. Council tax, it's the lowest in Lancashire. We'll have to confirm figures. But the calculation that was undertaken today shows that it was the same last year and the same this year. Wages, yes, we know the issues with wages. That's why we have been a real living wage employer and have paid for those most vulnerable on the lowest paid of our care workers. That's why we're focusing on jobs, why we're building a multiversity. Debt, structural, planned debt that has created infrastructure, will create jobs. Again, you used the quote, I used the quote, it's about the cost of everything but not seeing the value. That debt has created those, not just that road at the Enterprise Centre that will bring in jobs and investment for the private sector, but loads of other things across the town. Adults and children, obviously, I'll come back to that because I'll respond to Councillor Scott and Mitchell's comments, but obviously agree with that, what has been said by Councillor Hobson and Brooks. Working balances, you'll be pleased to know that those are over 7 million. National insurance, yes, it is a business tax. We have budgeted for it. I wish I had a crystal ball, as you have, but what I deal with is in realities and delivering on a really worked hard and budget that enables us to continue with those great plans that we have. Life expectancy. I'm trying to find a question. I mean, all of those plans, as Councillor Hugo has said, we can compare and contrast. All of those things really that you talked about. I want to talk about the park thing though. We built a new one at Palatine, which was, you know, vital facilities for that area. And that has now become the Eco Hub, bringing great facilities and connecting those people with all of that sports centre. I don't, and there's Highfield Road, so many green parks. And you know, last time we were here, you were complaining that we weren't putting a park opposite Mark Kelly's.
I'm sorry, Councillor, that there is a time limit on the right of reply.
I don't know.
Can we expect to extend the response to the leader?
Are we permitted to do that in standing orders?
You can set aside standing orders and vote to extend it if the whole council agrees.
Is it for the whole council? The majority of the council. Apparently under the standing orders we can vote to extend the right of reply, provided a majority of councillors approve that. So if someone wants to... first of all, does someone wish to propose that we extend the right of reply?
I will be quick because I really need to use the facilities.
Okay, fair enough.
Right, where was I? So parks, yeah, opposite Mark Kelly's. Not understanding, it's under our care that Stanley Park became a national treasure from our investment. That wasn't just haphazard, that was planned with an investment in local parks, creating Friends of the Parks. Highfield Road has a lovely park and community centre. I don't think you know South Shore terribly well, Councillor Galley. I mean, yes, all the other things we can, as I say, compare and contrast. Councillor Bradley Mitchell, I wasn't going to mention it, but, you know, Councillor Smith is right, 220 million, and it's 1.88 million. Billion, thank you. So, Where were we? Councillor Wiltshire, I didn't really understand the question. You were talking about reserves and working balances. As I say, the working balances at 7 million, reserves at 21 million. And if I could just make the point, it was your party's policy. You told local authorities, not just us, all local authorities, you haven't got enough money for your services, use your reserves. That was Conservative Party policy. Use your reserves. It's a bit rich. Now then, you know, when we have gone through 14 years of austerity to come out the end with 21 million reserves and 7 million working balances. Councillor Scott, I think the population changes. I think Councillor Brooks has stated some of the work that's ongoing. I think we get to know our population better, but it changes. It's getting older. Am I confident that we can deliver? I am with this government, because they are not just understanding local government, but they are also going to invest and sort out the NHS and the health service, which have been grossly underfunded and almost brought to its knees by the Conservative government. Children's social care, I've said it all before, Councillor Mitchell. In relation to council homes, it's going to be looked at by scrutiny, I understand. I have spoken to other leaders who have council homes. They had the same issue that we had when we closed our last children's home that was council owned. We had to close it because we went out 3 times to procurement for a children's centre residential homes manager and couldn't appoint. And when I spoke to a colleague who was in Lancashire, they've created 3 children's homes and they can't staff them. So we want children to have homes and we want them to have family homes, and that's what we can continue to do. And Councillor Hobson made the point. I think the prediction for last year, that when lots of local authorities were asked, that they were over 70% expected to go over budget. This year it's over 80%. This isn't just Blackpool Council. This is after 14 years of underfunding of all the services, public services across the board. And what is worse is that the Conservatives had 14 years to rectify this. I remember standing here 5 years ago. I think I had just become responsible for children's. And the Children's Commissioner, in their annual statement in the December before, had talked about the national scandal of residential homes and the cost, and children being sent miles away from their homes to residential placement. So that 5 years, so 4.5 years, still did nothing. The Conservative government did review after review and didn't implement them. So again, this council will continue to do what we need, what we have to spend to ensure that we have the best outcome for our children. They deserve that, and we will continue to do it. Councillor Sloan, Councillor Smith, Councillor Sloman. I can't speak for Keir Starmer, our Prime Minister. Not responsibilities, a bit to take more, because not have, and it's really easy in opposition. I know Councillor Taylor has spoken to me often about this, that you can make up these things, you can get out your crystal ball, but over here we have put an awful lot of effort into coming to deliver budgets and delivering. So it's really easy when you are not responsible, that you don't have to follow up with the consequences, but we have done over here. We've done that year after year after year. I didn't realise it. Councillor Brooks, yes, all those points that I've mentioned. Sorry, I can't read my own handwriting. I think it was just to sum up. I hope, if you'll take from what the speech earlier, I know it's very long and detailed, but that's because of what we are doing. Is a lot of those questions are, Councillor O'Neill, I know you're new to the council, but, and at the same time, this Labour Council has had to cope with 14 years of austerity. And if you'd have understood the implication that had for us to continue, and the fact that we are not putting services, yes, to all of those things, and that's why we're focusing on housing, jobs, education, that will provide hope for our residents and the children of this town. I think that's it, because I really need... Can we have a break?
Thank you, Councillor.
You didn't even get a clap. Never mind.
Right.
Good.
Right.
But you wouldn't have got one
Excuse me, can we move on, please? We now move to the vote, which by law also has to be a recorded vote.
Recorded vote on the motion in the name of Councillor Lynn Williams. Please could members indicate their answer with yes, no or abstain. Councillor Baker. No. Councillor Bamborough. Yes. Councillor Benson. Yes. Councillor Boughton.
Yes.
Councillor Neil Brooks.
Yes.
Councillor Pam Brooks. Yes. Councillor Sean Brooks.
Yes.
Councillor Burdess.
Yes.
Councillor Campbell.
Yes.
Councillor Cartmel.
Yes.
Councillor Ellison.
No.
Councillor Farrell.
Yes.
Councillor Fenlon.
Yes.
Councillor Flanagan.
Yes.
Councillor Galley.
No.
Councillor Hobson.
Yes.
Councillor Hoyle.
Yes.
Councillor Hugo.
Yes.
Councillor Jackson.
Yes.
Councillor Jones.
Yes.
Councillor Marshall.
Yes.
Councillor McKevitt. Councillor Bradley Mitchell.
No.
Councillor Carl Mitchell.
No.
Councillor Diane Mitchell.
No.
Councillor O'Neill.
No.
Councillor Roberts.
No.
Councillor Danny Scott.
No.
Councillor Michelle Scott.
No.
Councillor Sloman.
No.
Councillor Smith.
Yes.
Councillor Taylor. Councillor Thomas.
Yes.
Councillor Williams.
Yes.
Councillor Wilshaw.
No.
Mr Mayor.
Stern.
Mr Mayor, members have voted as follows. 23 for, 12 against, 1 abstention.
The motion is therefore carried. At this point, colleagues, fellow councillors, I think we need a well-deserved comfort break. Shall we say, please could we be back here by just going on for 1:45? Yeah. Thank you. think I was rather generous in giving us nearly 20 minutes. I think 10 or 11 would have sufficed, but there you go. Item 5, the capital strategy for 2025-26 to 2027-28. Councillor Williams to move.
To move the report. Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillors wishing to speak? Councillor Galley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I will be brief. We do have some major concerns on the capital strategy. It concerns a number of examples of questions that we've asked in this chamber, Mr Mayor. So, for example, in terms of transparency. So when we ask, for example, how is the Hounds Hill Centre performing against its loan, which would have been previously mentioned as part of the strategy a few years ago, we get answers like, quite well. Absolutely. And there is the problem, Councillor Taylor and yourself, Mr Mayor. The ability for us to scrutinise, to check if these things are correct and so on, especially when we identify issues like what we've discovered with the climbing ropes loan, which wasn't identified for us to find. It was because I happened to ask the question, Councillor Farrell, through transparency, correctly answered it or rightly answered it. So it doesn't seem to be able to answer those types of things where things may not be going quite as well as the original strategy set out to achieve, Mr Mayor, and that's why we won't be supporting this.
Anyone else wish to speak on this? No. That's fine. Right to reply.
Yeah, I will also be brief, Mayor. In terms of financial information, no other local authority makes available as much information as this council does. There is the opportunity for the Hounds Hill and even the climbing ropes, refer those through scrutiny. All of these things could be referred. That's in your hands to do so, but I'm satisfied that the information that we provide and when questioned is appropriate and open. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. It's now time to vote on the motion. All those in favour? All those against? That is carried. Item 6, that's the capital programme 2025 to 26 to 2027-28. Councillor Williams again to move.
Yes, happy to move. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Seconded.
Okay. Any speakers? Councillor Galley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Again, I will be brief. We won't be supporting this. We are very concerned about the long-term impact of top slicing that's now been introduced from 12.5% to 25%. And this could be potentially dangerous and impactful on schemes that we're not even aware of as yet. Unintended consequences always have an impact, Mr Mayor, and I don't think it's been adequately explained as to what those cuts will be taken from.
Any other speakers? Councillor Williams, right of reply.
Yes, top slicing, we're allowed to do that, but local authorities do that. That's why when government makes those capital allowances, they ring fence some, others isn't, because they know it then can be ring fence. And if we didn't ring fence, we wouldn't be able to fund things like the crematorium, Carlton Crem, etc., etc. I know it produces no particular evidence that this is potentially damaging. I think it's again back to that crystal ball. But I'm confident in terms of the policy and how it will be applied in a robust and challenged way. Thank you.
Thank you. So we come to the vote. All those in favour? All those against? That is carried. That brings us to item 7, Treasury Management Strategy 2025 to 26. Councillor Williams again.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, happy to move. Thank you.
Seconded.
Right, thank you. Anyone else wishing? Councillor Galley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We won't be supporting it. We have serious concern about the assumptions in this model, certainly around inflation, what's happening in Ukraine. The impact on borrowing costs will be higher, and we believe that the fair funding deal will be watered down. As referenced earlier, we believe the One Blackpool model is the answer and not the assumed approach that's been taken by this Labour Council.
Anyone else wishing to speak? No. Councillor Williams, right.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Yes, you're back to the crystal ball again. We deal with the here and now and facts and to deliver, confident in the policy, which will be continued, as I say, robustly examined. Yes, and I'm happy to recommend the report.
Thank you. We move to the vote again. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. All those against? Thank you. That is carried. That brings us to item 8, the Pay Policy Statement 2025 to 26. Councillor Williams to move the recommendation of the Chief Officer's Employment Committee.
Yes, I'm happy to move the report and the recommendations, Mayor.
Councillor Taylor. Okay, thank you. Anyone wishing to speak? Right, well, I don't think there's anything to reply to, Councillor, so I'll move straight to the vote. All those in favour? Are there any against? No, that one's unanimous, so declare that carried. Right, that concludes the business of the meeting, but just before we finally finish, if I could just remind everyone of the mayoral ball, which will take place on the 5th of April at the Imperial Hotel. Promises to be a great evening, and I'd urge as many of you as possible to attend it, please. With that, thank you for a very, very productive meeting, conducted, well, heated at times, but I will still say on the whole, conducted in a period of, in a spirit of comradeship worthy of our town. And that. So, thank you once again. Please have a peaceful evening. Thank you.